Hi, I'll pick up in this video where I left off in the last. Punktierte Noten, worauf eine Kürze im Hinaufgehen folgt, leiden auch Triller mit dem Nachschlage E. Anstatt dass sonst die letzte Note von dem Nachschlage allezeit in der größten Geschwindigkeit mit der folgenden verbunden wird, F, so geschieht dieses bei punktierten Noten nicht, weil ein ganz kleiner Raum zwischen der letzten Note des Nachschlags und der folgenden bleiben muss, G. Dieser Raum muss nur so viel betragen, dass man kaum hören kann, dass der Nachschlag und die folgende Note zwei abgesonderte Dinge sind. Da dieser Raum mit der Zeitmasse ein Verhältnis hat, so ist die bei G befindliche Ausführung, allwo die Schwänzung der letzten Note des Nachschlags diesen Raum andeutet, nur so ungefähr abgebildet. Es rührt dieses von dem Vortrage der punktierten Noten, wovon in dem letzten Hauptstücke gehandelt werden wird, her. Vermöge dessen, die auf die Punkte folgenden Kürzen, allezeit kürzer als die Schreibart erfordert, abgefertigt werden. Die bei H befindliche Verbindung des Nachschlags mit der folgenden Note ist also falsch. Es muss ein Komponist, wenn diese Art von Ausführung verlangt, solches ausdrücklich andeuten. So Bach is saying dotted notes where a short ascending note follows will also bear, endure, suffer, or tolerate a trill with the Nachschlag. And here's figure E. So that's the figure he's talking about, what you see in E. So the next bit we're learning a bit more about the Nachschlag. You know, another piece of the jigsaw to form the picture. And so the last note of the Nachschlag will be connected to the following note with the greatest of speed. That's what would normally happen with the last note of the Nachschlag. So you can use that when you're thinking of the swift continuation that could take the place of the Nachschlag. How would that be performed? That can be used in your figuring out of how it would be performed. So normally this is what would happen. And Bach says this doesn't happen with dotted notes, and that there needs to be a little bit of time between the last note of the Nachschlag. So in the case of E, that last note of the Nachschlag would be the F. And then this G, this short note following the dot, there has to be a little space of time. And that so that one can just about hear that they're two separate things. The Nachschlag and the note that follows are two separate things. And then he says, since this amount of space between those two notes is relative to the tempo and to the speed of what it is you're playing, the notation he provides in the figure G to indicate that, he says the tailing of the last note of the Nachschlag is it's just approximate, because this is the length of space is all depend on the situation, on the piece, the tempo, the character, everything. That'll influence the length of that last note of the Nachschlag. So it's just approximate, the tailing. And you can see in the example G, there's two examples he provides. There's the one with a dotted quarter note or a dotted crotchet, followed by an eighth note or a quaver. And then he shows how it's performed. And the next one is a dotted eighth note followed by a 16th note or a dotted quaver followed by a semiquaver. And I just want to say that the bow over it, like the phrase mark over those examples, that's not indicating that those should be played legato. That is just indicating that the two bars belong together, and that one is how it would appear. The first is how it would appear on the page, and the second one is how it would be performed. And I just want to say that. And there'll be, again, if you want to question my assertion, there'll be evidence I'll point out when we get to it to support my claim. So, those bows, I don't know what to call them. I'll call them bows. Bach calls it a bogan, and that translates as a bow, and I'll call it a bow too, because a phrase marker, it's just, there's no, I don't know. So hopefully you know what I'm talking about when I say the bow. Now you do. Yeah, so that bow does not mean play it legato. So, yeah, so we learn, so here's F. And so we're learning about the Nachschlag that it's joined to the following note with the greatest speed. And there you can see it notated. First of all, again, you see it as it appears in the score, and then how it's actually performed in the bar following it. And here's then G. And what you can see is, when you look at how it's to be actually performed, that second bar, you can see the F, that the G following the dot, instead of it being a eighth note or a quaver, it becomes a 16th note or a semiquaver. And again, you can see in the second example of G, that instead of it being a 16th note, it becomes a 32nd note. And so Bach says, he's going to deal with this in the last chapter, which we're going to get to. And that the short notes following the dot are always performed shorter than the way they're written indicates. Now this is something that none of the Roll of Honor know about. Nobody in Lilliput knows about it. And something you'll be hearing for the first time now, here. And you can see what a huge difference, what a huge effect that will have on your interpretation and performance of the music of Mozart or Bach or Beethoven or any of these people. And again, or something else, my interpretation, I would say that, or my translation of this text, I would say it belongs to one of the best you are going to find. If it's not the best or translation, you'll find it belongs to one of the best. And this translation or understanding of when Bach talks about the Schwänzung of the last note, in the wiki sources in the internet, that's translated as truncated. So what they say is the truncation of the last note indicates this space. I don't know what they said, but If you're following a translation like that, you're learning nothing, because that means nothing. It's complete gibberish. The person who translated it wouldn't be able to tell you what Bach is talking about. They don't know. And what makes my translation one of the best, or if not the best, is me knowing what it is Bach is talking about. So you get to understand it. Here, with this translation, you get to understand it. And I would say as well, in my performance of those figures, that since they're isolated, they might not be exactly the way I'd play them in the context of a piece. So, just to say that. Since Bach said, we'll clearly see how that example D is to be performed in paragraph 14. We are, even though in the examples G, Bach there's only one note, one short note following the dot. The same applies he's told us the same applies for when two short notes follow the dot. So that would mean in the performance of that first figure in D, that those notes following the dot, that instead of them being 32nd notes, they'll be 64th notes, or they'll be tailed 4 times instead of tailed 3 times. And that if you want to play a trill with a Nachschlag, between the last note of the Nachschlag and those joining notes, there'll be a gap, so you can just about hear that the notes following the dot and the last note of the Nachschlag are 2 separate things. So we're getting the next information in terms of Bach teaching us how to play that opening trill in K330. He's telling us how to play it if we want to play a trill with a Nachschlag there, how that is to be performed. And then he goes on to say, if you look at H, figure 27H, that the connection of the following note with the Nachschlag is incorrect. That is incorrect. When the following note, you can see there that there's no gap between the last note of the Nachschlag and the following note to indicate there's 2 separate things, and that's incorrect. And the same can be applied if you look at so you have how it appears and then how it's played. And if you ignore the first F, there's 2 Fs there, one tied to the next. If you kind of block out that first F, what you have, and imagine the trill over the second F with the dot, what you have then is the same as the trill of K330. And then instead of the G, there'd be two notes then. There'd be a G and A instead of the G. And so the trill could look like this. I've written out that version of it for K330. And that version of it you will find recommended as one of the options by the Roll of Honour by Lilliput. And, you know, of all those people, you know, who publish books, experts, academics, leading experts, people giving masterclasses, this will be one of the accepted publishers, editors. This will be one of the accepted versions of how to perform that trill and the following, the swift continuation after the dot. And you won't find anybody on the Roll of Honour saying, no, this is wrong. None of them. If you performed it the way they suggest, they're not going to say, they'll say that's a perfectly acceptable version. All of Lilliput, all of the Roll of Honour will say that. But Bach doesn't say that. When you're getting your lesson from Bach, he will say, that is wrong. And he doesn't, that can't be misinterpreted. That is clear as day. That is 100% incorrect to play it like that. And he goes on to say, a composer, when he wants this type of execution, has to explicitly indicate such. And in that example of H, what did Bach do? In that, you know, the second bar of that example H, he explicitly indicated the performance. And so if Lilliput wants to argue with me, and they don't want to say, you know what, you've uncovered a great error we've made, a misconception we've been having, thank you, well done. If they don't want to do that, if they don't want to admit their error, the error of their ways, and if they want to fight it to the end, they will have to say, they would have to say, for me that's easier, you know, because I say Mozart didn't compose K330. And I'm not, you know, I'm not saying that because I want to convince you or win you over onto my side. In fact, you know, if you think about it, if it's found out that Mozart didn't compose K330, and I'm the only one who said it, who called it. You know, if you think of The Emperor's New Clothes, it was the one kid in the audience that said he's not wearing any clothes. If I'm that kid and I'm the only one, I feel like that's much cooler than if everybody's saying it. So I'm you know, I feel no sort of urge or need to convince anybody that Mozart didn't compose K330. So I'm the only one who says Mozart didn't compose K330. And so if you were to ask me, would the composer of K330 be a composer that doesn't know that if they want such an execution that they need to expressly indicate it? I'd say that it's possible that that composer did not know that they need to expressly indicate that, you know, performance of, if that's what they wanted. Whereas Lilliput, whereas the Roll of Honour have to answer now, they have to say, when asked, would Mozart be a composer who'd know such a thing? Would he be a composer who'd know he'd have to explicitly indicate such a performance were he to want such a one? And would he have written it the way it's written in K330 if he wanted that way of performing it that the Roll of Honour recommends, that published, academic books or editions of the score would recommend? They'd have to say, no, Mozart probably didn't know that he'd need to do that. And you could, like I wrote it out, or like Bach explicitly indicated it here, that that's how Mozart would have done it. And this is a Mozart who said to Bach, who met Bach towards the end of his life. So Mozart had not long to live after he met Bach. So Mozart will have done a lot of his composing, had a lot of his career at that point. And he said to Bach, "You are the father, we are the children. Anybody who knows anything at all about music." And he's not talking here about Lilliput or the Roll of Honour, the Treffers, all these people. He is talking about people who actually know something about music. He's not talking about those who'd recommend that way of performing that trill, even though it's not been expressly indicated by the composer. He's not talking about those people. He is talking about anybody who knows anything about music. He says, who knows it because of you. And anybody who doesn't admit this is a bleep. So that's what Mozart said. And Mozart, do you not think Mozart doesn't know what's in here? Do you think Mozart hasn't read this book? Do you think Mozart hasn't heard all this? Mozart was given lessons. Mozart learned with Johann Christian Bach, Karl's brother. He will have been taught very similar things from Karl's brother, because a lot of this will have stemmed from their father, Johann Sebastian Bach. That'll be the source from where all this insight information is flowing. So this is what Mozart was getting from Johann Christian. And Johann Christian got it from the same source that Karl's getting it from their dad, from Johann Sebastian Bach. So Lilliput would have to say, no, Mozart isn't a composer that would know that, if they don't want to admit that what they've been recommending is 100% incorrect. And if you think of a sports hall, let's say there's a sports hall, a gymnasium or whatever, and it's full of the Roll of Honour. Everybody on the Roll of Honour is in that sports hall, and so is Bach, and that they're divided based on the criteria of this point here. The Roll of Honour says to perform that trill this way, where the follow-on notes are directly connected to the Nachschlag, just as Bach notates it in the example H, that they say, yes, that's right, that's correct, that's a possible way to do it. So based on that criteria, they're also on one side of the hall, and then Bach, who says it's incorrect, it's completely incorrect, Bach is there on his own. And that's the way they're divided up on that criteria. None of the Roll of Honour can be here, because none of the Roll of Honour has said that is incorrect. They might support a different way of playing it, but they don't say, no, this is incorrect. So here's Bach, and here's the roll of honour. And the roll of honour don't want to say, no, Bach is right, we were wrong. And it's too late now. They've already, stated their stance, where they stand. Imagine Mozart walks into that hall and he has a choice of where to go. Does he want to go to the roll of honour to Lilliput and join them, or is he going to go and join Bach? He's going to go and join Bach. Is he going to agree with Bach, or is he going to agree with Lilliput? He'll agree with Bach. And how do you think Mozart will feel when he finds out, like he'll meet Bach and he'll go, they'll have a warm welcome. Lilliput will be standing there with their jaws to the floor, like gaping, like a bunch of gobdaws. And Mozart will say, what's all this about? And then he'll say, who are this crowd? And then Bach says, yeah, it's Lilliput. And they think that... They don't think you're a composer who'd know to explicitly indicate such a performance of such a figure. So they maintain that what they say is correct. How do you think Mozart will react to that? Do you think he'll get angry? And I could say as well, Bach will say, and you know what else? They think you composed K330. And then, how would Mozart feel about that? I would say he would like to, that if he were to feel like he'd like to take all his music away from them, that he'll regret having given them any of his music, I would understand. And if you think of the Emperor's New Clothes, the roll of honour and Lilliput, or in the Emperor's New Clothes, the people in the crowd, at the parade, they'll have, they'll be trying to top each other with how they compliment the Emperor's New Clothes. If somebody says it's nice, the next person will say, oh, it's really nice. And the person after will say, it's beautiful. And it's the same with K330. Those roll of honour who are on the other side of the hall, they're going on what a masterpiece it is. How wonderful it is. They're not, and it's the exact same as in the Emperor's New Clothes. They're trying to outdo each other with how they, in how they show, how they can appreciate the piece. So I think Mozart would be quite peeved. And he definitely, when he hears that, he definitely won't want anything to do with Lilliput and the roll of honour. But what you're getting from this here is, in your lesson from Bach, it means you are now able to rule out a version of that trill with 100% certainty. So when in that version where Lilliput, where the roll of honour recommends that you can play the 4 notes, so the 2 notes of the Nachschlag plus those 2 follow-on notes, all in equal speed and all joined together, that is 100% incorrect. So that narrows down. In your lesson with Bach, he has narrowed down the choice you're faced with. You get to, everything you know for definite helps. So you get to cancel out that version for definite as being 100% wrong. And you also get more information about the Nachschlag in this paragraph, that the Nachschlag is connected with the greatest speed to the following note, which means when did I say that? So those notes, when they take the follow-on notes, when they take the place of the Nachschlag, they're connected to the following note with the greatest of speed. So you know, if you can perform the trill with a Nachschlag, having a small room between the last note of the Nachschlag and the swift continuation, the two notes. You can do it that way, or you can consider the swift continuation taking the place of the Nachschlag. So you connect it with the greatest speed to the following note, and that there's no interruption between the trill. Just like there's no interruption between the trill and the Nachschlag normally, there's no interruption between the trill and the notes that take the place of the Nachschlag. And you could think, you know, in paragraph 13, Bach says with a completely slow tempo. And you could as well wonder with K330, you know, it's allegro moderato, and think that's not completely slow. But if you can consider, and I'll say, yeah, it's, and the slowness, that all depends on the length of the note. That's what that affects, how long the note is over which you're trilling. And if you think of the 16th notes in K330 and compare them with, let's say, the 16th notes of, you know, another Mozart sonata, the first movement, like the D major Dürnitz one, you could see that the 16th notes in K330 are considerably slower than other 16th notes. And so in relation, you can consider then the 32nd notes, or the demi-semiquavers in K330, and compare them to, you know, depending on the interpretation or the performance you listen to, they can be slower than 8 notes or quavers in a Beethoven sonata. So you could ask yourself, is that a fast tempo in reality, or is it quite slow? Given the length of each note, given the length of the 16th notes and the 32nd notes compared to the length of those notes in another work. So when you think of the length of that dotted quaver or dotted 8 note, would that be the same length? Would that note have the same length as the equivalent note in a slow movement? When you consider the speed of 16 notes in a slow movement, that they wouldn't be much slower than those 16 notes in the first movement, the K330. The only thing that makes K30 feel fast is how many 32nd notes are in there. So that might not rule out the trill with the Nachschlag for K330. But you've made significant progress though in your lesson with Bach, because you've been able to rule out one of the versions that you wouldn't have been able to rule out before. Okay, that's all for today. I'll continue on in the next video. So, bye, and thanks for watching.